What is Islam? The big question. Now, before looking at what is Islam, I really like to look at what is religion and what's its role in our life. Interestingly, this week, I do counselling and therapy, predominantly in the Asian community. And there was this young boy, and his dad had brought him, and he wasn't sure whether he believed in Islam. And his parents were freaking out, as you can imagine. And he's got himself a white girlfriend, and his parents just don't know how to deal with this, because they know if they exert pressure on him, he's just going to rebel even more. So they brought him to me. So, the white token Muslim, he might be able to knock some sense into him. So we just discussed. I wasn't forcing anything, and I realised that the problem was that he had pressure. This guy who's 18 now, needs space to explore, and in exploration is where we find conviction. That's the thing, and I think that's really important for people who have been born Muslim or any faith. Is that sort of crisis of faith is a very important part of faith, and so we just discussed, and this is the first thing I raised. I said, what is the role of religion anyway? Is it just a cultural identity? Because I think we've got a big issue today about everything's just about identity, but I think and I'm not dismissing that. We do identify, of course we identify things. There's something a bit broader, I think. And so I ask, this is the first questions I said, your religion should be fulfilling 5 things. And this is taken from, I put this source there. It's about an American author called Philip Goldberg, who was really fascinated about, in the 60s and 70s, how Americans were giving up their traditional faith of Christianity and turning to the East. So he was asking why. What does their religion, that their inherited tradition, not provide for them that maybe Eastern faiths do? So he came up with this idea of there's 5 essential elements that need to be in your faith. The first one is, as you see, translation. What does that mean? These are called the 5 trans. These are. So translation means that your religion explains to you your experience. So it translates to you what's going on. So here I am living in this, experience of life. Where did I come from? What am I doing here? What's my purpose here? Where am I going? And so forth. So it translates you. Why is there suffering in the world? Why is there good and evil? What's my purpose and role? All these questions. So can your religion answer those questions? And when I say religion here, I'm using the term very loosely. I mean any sort of mode of life that you choose to take. It should be able to answer those questions. We need to. Children, when they're raised, at a very early age, what's the question they always ask children? Well, then maybe. That's very deep. I mean, I was looking a bit, that is one of the questions, but why, isn't it? Why, until we get so annoyed with them and say, stop asking why, and then they're like this for the rest of their life. Because because that's a natural inclination for the human being to want to find meaning in their life. They want to be able to translate what this is. And so why is a very important question. We tend to lose that, and we only rediscover it once the kids have probably left home, or we've got a midlife crisis, or my missus or my husband's left me, and then we start those questions become very important, because the human being is about meaning. That's what makes man unique, is that he needs meaning in his life. And if people have such travesty in their life, they will always come, and they can't find meaning, that's where the trauma happens. And that's always, even in trauma therapy, which that's what I specialise in, is that it's about shifting meaning. So, and looking at things from a broader perspective, but not in a cognitive way. It's got to start from the bottom up. The therapy I do is a bottom-up approach, working with bodily sensations, and then eventually shifting our perspectives once we've sat with those. So the next one is transmission. What do I mean by transmission? Your religion or your way of life, it's passed through generation to generation and stood the test of time. So it's not and not to dismiss it, but Scientology, It doesn't really have a transmission except through, does anyone know anything about Scientology? I love cults. I really, there's this Lena Ramini's like Scientology's exposing Scientology. I love all that stuff. It's really fascinating to see how people can actually convince people to do stupid things and ruin people's lives. It's really interesting. And so there should be some transmission. Has this way of life stood the test of time so I can rely upon it? That's the other thing. And it passed from from teacher to teacher to teacher, from teacher to student, going back, like a mentorship. And I don't know if anyone that knows Russell Brand, I'm sure you will know him. He's recently come out with a book called About Mentors. And he's saying the importance of mentorship and how that's so lacking in our youngsters. I had one client come to me who was in a really bad mess with their marriage. And it was a really strange situation because the guy didn't want to have sex with his wife, and his wife was trying to basically have sex with me, and he was like, ah, like this. And what's really interesting was he was freaking out because he hadn't been prepared for marriage. I said, for God's sake, you're a GP. And I said, you're a GP and you can't deal with having sex. You're looking at naked bodies probably half your time, dealing with bodily issues. And he said, no, the difference is, he said, and he was right. He said, the difference was I was mentored through my medical school. No one mentored me for marriage. And I think that was a very profound point, to be honest. And so mentorship's very important. And so this idea of transmission. The next one is transaction. Does your religion or way of life teach you, have clear principles about how to interact with yourself, interact with other people, and interact as a society? So how do we conduct marriages? How do we conduct business transactions? And so forth and so forth and so forth. It should have some clear guidelines. Notice I've coupled these three together. I put these three together because these are they're not really, they're not accurately externals because obviously translation's about belief. But they're things that you can adopt without really having some profound change, if that makes sense. So I could have a belief system. I could have a transmission, my faith, and I could know how to transact with people, but it might not change the way my perspective of life still. Possible. And so the last two are a different sort of focus. Transformation. Does your faith or whatever bring about some transformation in your life, making you a better person, refining your character, and so forth? And then the last one, transcendence. Does your religion or way of life enable you to look from a higher perspective and feel connected to something that's so much vaster than the material world that we live in? And we're all seeking that as human beings. A simple example of this is when I get really stressed with all the Pakistani politics in Keighley. Keighley is a little town, and it goes Keighley, about 30 years behind, Bradford, maybe 10, being fair, Leeds, pretty hip, Manchester, whoa! So we go to Bradford, the Bradfordians go to Leeds, and the Leeds, they either stay where they are or they go to Manchester, or Old Trafford Centre maybe. So there's this idea that you want to transcend. We want to move through something and get high, being the operative word here, because if religion doesn't fulfill that role, guess what young people do? They turn to drugs and stimulants because they need that transcendence. And if the religion or their way of life does not fulfill that, they will seek it in alternative ways, which are obviously in the short term beneficial, and in the long term, you don't grow in life. You become stunted by it. And so, and what I find fascinating is generally immigrant communities are more interested in the first three because identity is very important to an immigrant community, like first generation. And you can appreciate that. They're in an alien country, they stick together, and they want to make sure they're safe, and they want to hold on. They think their identity is falling apart, so they solidify it by coming together. It's very natural. Every first generation immigrants do this. But then the second generation, they've got those foundations. And now they're looking for more meaning because they've been born, especially third generation. I think third generation is where the real challenge comes. So these five, does that make sense to everybody? So religion should be that, and so all of us should be asking ourselves, how does our faith address these issues? And if they don't, you also obviously will have a crisis of faith, and you will be looking for alternatives. Now, this brings us to the religion of Islam, what's interesting is the word for religion in Arabic is deen, That's D-I-N or D-E-E-N, however you want to spell it. And Arabic breaks into 3-letter roots. So that all words go back to a 3-letter root. So you've got dal, ya, noon. And dal, ya, noon. So religion in Arabic means something, a system that you bind yourself to. And interestingly, even in English, the word religion means to bind. And so it's about, what's a religion? You limit yourself to certain things because you have principles. That's the idea of a religion. So, for example, I say I'm a Muslim and someone puts a bacon sandwich in front of me. I say, no, I'm sorry, I don't eat bacon. So I've restricted myself. The idea is because I believe in certain things, I won't do other things. And so, obviously, a vegetarian, he may, it's not religion, obviously, vegetarianism, but he's bound himself, hasn't he? He says, I live by certain principles, I don't believe that animals should be harmed, and so, if someone puts in front of me something of meat, I won't eat it. So that's the idea of a religion. It's something you bind yourself to, a system. And that's necessary for any society to do that. We bound ourselves that we would drive on the, which side? Let me get my bearings right. Are we on the left or the right? Left. Whilst in America, they're on the right. Well, you may say, well, that ain't fair. I don't feel like driving on the left-hand side. It doesn't feel like I was born to be on the left-hand side. I'd like to be on the right-hand side. Well, tough, mate. We've got a society and we have to deal with these issues. And so what's important here is that we put our desires, it's not that we dismiss our desires, but we keep our desires in check with something that's actually of higher value, which is our ethics and morals. That's far more important for us than just as my dad's philosophy was, being happy. And we're not saying that we shouldn't be happy. All Muslims are happy, aren't they? But the idea is that, being happy is good, but it's not the be end and end all, because you'll be living miserable if you think you have to be happy all the time to be happy, because it's just that's not what life's about. Oh, what happened there? So, that's what we understand as religion. So it could be any walk of life. It's something you bind yourself to. And the word, what's going on here? The word for our faith as Muslims is Islam. And I think it's really fascinating, this word, because most faiths, there are exceptions to this, are isms, aren't they? We've got Christianity, it's linked to going back to Jesus. We've got Judaism that links to a tribe. And we've got Buddhism that goes back to Buddha. There's not many faiths that actually talk about a philosophy in their actual name. There are exceptions to that, like, for example, Hinduism was made up by the English, I heard. I don't know if anyone could correct me, but it's actually the Vedic tradition, it's called. And the Vedic, I don't know much about Hinduism, but the Veda means knowledge, I think. And so that's very interesting, that their religion is about knowledge, essentially. And then obviously you've got Taoism or Daoism, isn't it? I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, where it translates as the path. So Islam's very much in that line in terms of the meaning of its faith, because Islam, usually what do Muslims tell these guys that are scared of us? Our faith, do you know what it means? It means what? Peace, we're a bunch of hippies, we love everybody, which isn't necessarily true. Obviously, we're all covert really, and we're all trying to pretend to be something we're not. What's Islam mean? The inherent meaning, and this is so beautiful about Semitic languages, is it comes from a root, Islam, from Sin, Lam, Mim. And the root of this word means to be whole. That's what it means. One of the names of God in Islam is As-Salam. And everyone says that's peace. It's not peace. It means that God is whole in his being and free from any naqs, any deficiency. There's some really interesting words that come from this word, like we've got sulam, which is a ladder. Yeah, we've got sulama, which are like limbs, the joints in your bodies. We've got salam, which means peace. We've got istislam, which means surrender. So there's many, many words that derive from these roots. That's something that's really beautiful about Semitic languages, is from that root you can draw so many words. So what's the essential meaning of this word? It means that things are connected, i.e. holistic, and they're free from any taint, any blemishes. That's the idea. And that's God. He's complete, he's whole, he's absolute reality. He's pure being. And Islam So where do we get this idea of peace from? Because if you have everything you need, you feel whole in your whole being, of course, you're going to feel what? Peace. At peace, because you don't need anything. And so that's where we get the word peace from. It's a nuance of the essential word. And obviously other people say that Islam means, what's the other common translation of Islam?
Submission.
Usually scares the living daylights out of it. We are slaves to God and we submit. So yes, surrender or submission. And I think this is very beautiful. The idea of this word is, well, how's that come from your whole being? Because Islam means to give your whole being over to something. Or whatever it is. It's like you surrender yourself or you surrender something to someone else. And we know that the idea, and what's so beautiful about it, the form of this word is something active. So it's active submission. It's not like, and I'm not going to do anything. It's you having to put effort in. Because in my line of work, when we're doing therapy, all the suffering comes through people struggling, like resisting what's happening, the change in their life. So the idea of Islam is, it's about in the things that you have no control over, you're going to suffer if you resist that. And I had to deal with that today because I was late for my train and I could be like, oh my God, why is this happening? And I could be venting at the train service and I could be really like, I can't believe it, and chewing internally on it. How's that going to help me? In situations that you have nothing you can do about, what do you need to do? You need to let go. If you are in pain and suffering and someone comes over to you and say, are you okay? You let yourself over, you share your vulnerability with that person and you let go whilst, no, I don't know if I can trust that person. Well, you're always going to be in pain if you can't let go in certain circumstances. Does that make sense? So the idea is, but it's not easy, that submission, is it? That idea of letting go and submitting to the circumstances is very difficult. And so there's effort there's effort required from submission. That's what Islam's all about. So that's the ethos of Islam, is that you surrender yourself to something larger than yourself. And in doing so, you will find peace. And we live in a time today where it's all about, what's the word? It's not about duty. The focus is more about my rights. But duty and rights have to go hand in hand. And we're saying, it shouldn't be like this. That's not fair. Blah-de-blah-de-blah. You're going to be miserable all your life if you keep living like that. You just got to let go, actively let go and try to make a change in your life, but again, submitting to what's outside of your capability. And in doing so, you find peace in that. Now, that's very scary for people, and I can understand that. But if you lived your life by that ethos, that is essentially what Islam is. And so that's what I really want to highlight first, is what is Islam, the whole philosophy behind Islam. It's about not holding on to things and identifying with just those things, but realizing that you're actually something far larger than that. And why not attach yourself to the absolute reality, something that's ultimately vast, that can bring you, that you'll always be exploring, and so that you can shed each skin like a snake until you become something that's whole. And you do that by connecting to the one that is whole. Clear? Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's the philosophy of Islam. Now, now to go into a bit of details, Islam's generally divided into 3 categories, which comes from a famous tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, which many Muslims are familiar with, the Hadith of Jibreel, or the tradition of Gabriel. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, where was he? He was sitting with his fellow believers and his companions, and then suddenly a man turned up who had no sign of travel on him, and no one else recognised him, which is very strange because you couldn't keep pristine white clothes in those days if you're from that sort of area. And so they said, this is very strange. We don't know him, so he must be a traveller, but if you're a traveller, we would see the signs of travel on him. And then he comes to him and sits before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, and says, "Oh Muhammad, inform me about..." You all don't know this, don't you guys? Inform me about Islam. What is Islam? Now this is interesting because I spoke about the actual ethos behind, or the philosophy behind Islam, but then it's compartmentalised as everything when we separate things. So here Islam's been looked in a different fashion. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, says Islam is that you declare, and these are the 5 pillars of Islam that many people will be familiar with. You declare that there is no deity worthy of worship except God alone, the absolute reality. And so you declare that. And then you perform the prayer, the ritual prayer, and then you offer you pay the obligatory tax, charity tax to the poor and needy, and then you fast the month of Ramadan, and then if you're able to, once in your life, you perform the Hajj. Okay, most Muslims are familiar with this. So these are what we know as the 5 pillars of Islam. So these are the externals. What's really interesting here is that we start with externals because we can deal with externals. You know, it's something that I can get on with, and then my faith is a practice after that. And so it's like, in order to taste the fruits, I've got to do something. And so initially, Islam is to focus on acts. Okay. Now, as I said, if someone accepted the faith, as much as they're able to muster, is that they try to implement these things. With the belief, like an exercise routine, is that when you do that, you'll start to feel the fruits. But even the exercise, or whatever it is, it requires a belief system, like what you're doing. Why are we doing this? And so the next question that the stranger asked was, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, said to him, "You've spoken truly." And he said, no, when the Prophet Muhammad, he mentioned this was the answer, and then the man says, "You've spoken correctly." And everyone's like, "What? You ask a question, and then the person gives an answer, and you says, right, what's going on here? This is a bit odd." So then he asks another question, "Inform me about," go on guys, Iman. And Iman, interesting, people have a bit of an issue. Some people like to translate it as belief, others like to say faith. And like anything, it's a bit of both. So how do you distinguish between belief and faith? Because belief is usually dogma, isn't it? It's like the things I believe in, articles of faith. While faith is something that comes from the heart, you have conviction in it. And in Islam, usually the answer in Islam is that it lies in the middle. It's both of these two. So let's say faith or belief, whatever you want to translate it as. And the Prophet Muhammad says that you believe in God and you believe in his angels. It goes down, obviously the angels bring. What do the angels bring? They bring the revelations, so these books throughout time. So in Islam we believe that they're obviously from Adam to Eve, who were prophets in the Islamic understanding. Then from them, prophets came throughout time to speak to specific communities, that's from the Islamic understanding, and teach them a law that was appropriate for their time, but the belief was the same, the belief in one God throughout time. And most of those prophets, Christians and Jews are familiar with as well. They're the same prophets, bar a few exceptions. And so you believe in the books, the scriptures, and you believe in the way that they were revealed to their prophets in their pristine condition, and then later on they became changed, and thus there was a need to send another prophet. And then to believe in his prophets, and to believe in the day, the last day, in the resurrection and the last day, and to believe in destiny, okay, qadr in Arabic. And he says, "You've spoken correctly." And everyone's saying, "Why does he keep asking these questions?" And then he's like, "Why do you ask a question and then you say he's correct? Why do you ask a question in the first place if you know what the answer is?" And then, so that's the next thing. So first and foremost, I've got to be careful what I touch. So don't do that. I'm not going to put red button. Islam is the outward practice. Iman is the belief system. And then finally, he says, "Now inform me about Ihsan." And Ihsan is a very difficult word to translate. It comes from the same pattern as Islam, not the roots, but the Ihsan, Islam. And Ihsan, Hasuna, means to something that's beautiful. And really, it's the opposite of a Hasana, is a Sayyi'ah. And a Sayyi'ah is usually translated as sin, but I translate it as a shameful act. It's something that makes your face drop because you've done it and you feel really bad about it. And so a hasana is the opposite of it. So what's a hasana? So if you think about shame, if you experience shame, you close off, don't you? It has physiological reactions to it. You look down, you can't look the person in the eye. I saw this thing on Facebook a few weeks ago. It wasn't hilarious, I actually felt sorry for the dog. Did anyone see it? There was 2 dogs, and somebody in the cat, one of the 2 dogs at the kitty food, and it was open and ripped open. So he goes up to one of the dogs and says, "Did you do it?" And he just looks at him like this. And then he turns to the other dog, and the other dog's in the corner like this. And he says, "Did you do it?" And the dog can't even look him in the face. It's like this. He says, "You can't look me in the eyes, can you?" And then he says, "You did it, didn't you?" And the dog tries to look up, but he can't do it, so he starts going like this. Oh, it's really, I started like... And then eventually goes, "Right, you know where you need to go." And he walks towards the sin bin, basically. And it's really beautiful. But it's a beautiful expression of how shame shows up physiologically in the body. And it's this closed-off state. So Ihsan is something you do that makes you feel open to the world. And there's a really beautiful prophetic tradition about this. It says, basically, have consciousness or fear God wherever you are. Be aware of him and your relationship with him. And whenever you do a shameful deed, he says, what should you do next? You follow it up with a good deed. I.e., shame is a natural thing that happens to someone, but if you hold the shame for too long, it actually becomes destructive. So shame should be a temporary state that you experience. And then he says, as soon as you do something shameful that makes you feel broken and makes you feel awful about yourself, then follow it up with a good deed, something that makes you actually feel open again. And so that you don't dwell on the shame, because shame is one of the most destructive qualities if you hold on to shame. And so that's CBT in itself, is that, cognitive behavioural therapy, is that bring yourself out of that state. How do you do it? By doing something. And they say one of the reasons, someone was at a talk yesterday I was at, one of the reasons we feel we feel down, a lot of people feel down, is because they expose themselves to news. Because the nature of the human being is, if he sees something that's wrong, he wants to do something about it. And it's not natural for us to have to be exposed to so many things that we can't do anything about. And so it has an effect on us emotionally and spiritually. And so be careful of how much news you watch, because it has an effect on you emotionally and spiritually. And so the Prophet says, do something, make a change. And if you can't do that, at least raise your hands open to the Maker, so you feel that something's may come about it. That's very important for human beings. And so Ihsan is to bring about openness, literally, or to bring about beauty in the world. And I remember an example of my friend. He was from California, and he was a bit of a hippie. I don't know if everyone's Barack Blue. I don't know if he's a poet. It's a famous American poet. My dad was like a big hippie, and he said, my dad's going to be well into Islam. And he started talking to him about Islam, and he says, "No, I'm sorry, it's not for me, son." And he's like, "Okay." And then one time he decided to take his dad to Istanbul, and he walked into the Blue Mosque, if people are familiar with it. And he said, his dad walked in, he says, "Now I get it." Because I love Turkish architecture and Turkish food and everything. Is that the Turks do everything to a standard. You walk into those mosques and you're like, "Whoa, dude, this is far out. This is something's about this. It's transcendent experience." And so his dad experienced that, and that's basically the idea of Islam. Muslims is they try to bring about beauty in the world so that people can get in touch with God, and that's the idea of Ihsan. Now, he asked him. He said, "Oh, Muhammad, what is Ihsan then?" And he says, "It's to worship God as if you see Him, and know that if you don't see Him, He sees you." So at least have an awareness that He sees you. So this is now the practice. So these are the 3 aspects of the religion Islam: is that the outward practice, the belief, and then bringing about change in yourself and bringing about change in others by having a connection to something far vaster than you, absolute, that you can you can throw it out to them, and they can bring solutions in your life. So this is what Islam is about, and I've mentioned this. Is that the whole pillars of the faith is about, you have your declaration, your belief. I believe this. It's like an affirmation, if you will. This is what I do. And Muslims are encouraged to say the Shahada, the declaration of faith. I testify that there's no God, no deity worthy of worship but God, and that Muhammad is his messenger, regularly in their life to reinstill what are they doing. And what is a God? This is very important. From an Islamic perspective, we understand a God is something that if it would be to remove from your life, you would not consider continuing your life. It's something that your life pivots around. And so a God is and we're not saying you shouldn't be distressed when loved ones die and so forth, but you still realise there's something higher, and there's still worth living, and I can get through this. So that's God to us, and we, as Muslims, we believe that should be something completely ultimate that we connect ourselves through, that would never let us down. It's not in the corporal world, it's not in the transient world. And so everything that we remind ourselves constantly, don't get attached. It's not that you're going to get attached, because we have to, as humans, we get attached to things, of course, but have a healthy attachment. What's a healthy attachment? That you realise everything is going to perish eventually. Okay, everything. And so we enjoy things in life. It's not that we become miserable toe rags, but we realise we have to accept eventually this will pass and be fleeting. So why not attach to something that that never passes, God himself? And so we constantly have to remind ourselves, because in our lives we do get attached to things, and we do end up becoming tunnel vision. We develop tunnel vision. And then we manifest that by connecting to God 5 times a prayer. So a devoted Muslim who wants to practice his faith seriously, he will be praying he will try to pray 5 times a day, and then they will perform zakat. So it's about bringing a connection to God, but also connecting to people. So there's this idea of having empathy. And so this is one of the most important things about religion. If you look at most religious institutions, even within, outside of the Islamic faith, it was about these endowments that were established. They were the ones that established the universities and so many things for society, because people wanted to give, because they realised they were giving to something that was far vaster than them, and that would be lasting even after they pass away. So this is a very important thing in Islam, about giving and connecting to the poor. And that's why it's very beautiful in traditional Islamic countries, like I can speak on behalf of Fez, you'd see the wealthy living amongst the poor. They'd have bigger houses, of course, but it wouldn't be this. In the new city of Fez, you have got the rich areas, and they call it, in Fez, they call it Hayul Fara'ina, which means the neighbourhood of the pharaohs, which is not a positive, that's not a compliment from a Muslim traditional standpoint. Because why do they call that? Because they've isolated themselves and they think they're tyrants. Whilst in traditional Muslim communities, everyone lived amongst one another, so they could connect with one another and knew what the needs of the people were. And that's the zakat demonstrates that. And then once a year, if people are physically able to, they fast. They spend it. I call this the month of detoxing spiritually, detoxing, physically and mentally. And then, obviously, once in your life, reconnecting to your source, the Hajj. Because from an Islamic perspective, the Kaaba is considered where the creation emerged. And most faiths, traditions, I'm really into myth, is that they talk about the world navel. That every society had a belief that basically this is where the source of life came. And as Muslims, we believe the centre of the universe is reflected in the Kaaba. It's like a shadow of the heavens above. And so it's like you're going back to the source from which you came and purifying yourself once in your lifetime to connect to that. So these are the 5 pillars of Islam. Another really important concept in Islam, so I've got 10 minutes, I think, haven't I?
Don't worry about it.
I will worry about it. Is this concept of fitrah. So it's a very beautiful word, fitrah. Fatara means to create, but there's so many words for create in the Quran. And this is why I teach Quranic Arabic and the nuances of the words. So we've got like khalaqa, means to create, and we've got like awjada, means to bring into being. We've got bara'a, a bari'. Allah is the khaliq and he's the bari'. So all these words have different nuances. Fatara, what's interesting, a word that comes from this root is one is fitr. I.e., we break the fast. It's breaking something. And mushrooms come from this word as well. Because the idea of this, the focus on creation here is that it's creation with growth. Because you can imagine it, when you break your fast, you're putting nutrition back into your fast and you're growing again. It's like you come alive. And so fitra it's usually translated as the primordial way that human beings were created. I.e., if you were to leave that human being in a healthy state, they would develop towards that. Which is really beautiful, because if we understand from education, is that each child has a different direction in his will. It's very, very different. And so the role of the parent is to sort of get in touch with his natural inclination and sort of harness it, but nurture it in a healthy way. Not give him complete license, but seeing where his skills lie, that child, and channeling him towards his potential. And this is the idea of fitra in Islam, is that every human being has this primordial way that he would incline towards if he wasn't swayed by his parents or swayed by his society. And we all do this, it's just natural that we go off course. And Islam, the idea is that we have a natural way, so it's not original sin from a Christian perspective, but it's the idea that we have our natural way, and then we obviously we go off course. And so regularly the Muslims trying to reorient. And a beautiful analogy, I don't know if people are into personal growth here, Jack Canfield, I don't know if you've heard of Jack Canfield. It's like Chicken Soup for the Soul, I don't know if anyone's heard from those book series. But he talked about how, if you think of an aeroplane, in the old days, I don't know if it's like this anymore, an aeroplane is constantly going off course. And it's the air-ground control that are feeding back to them, your off-course centre. And so the idea in our life is that we're constantly going off course, and then things happen in our life that push us back on course. But we have to be open and aware of what's going on in our life to do that. And interestingly, even in English, the word sin is actually an archery term. It means to be off target. And so a sin is not something that there are, in Arabic we have words that make you, like say a shameful deed, but a khata means to be off course. And so when we make mistakes, it's feedback for us about where we need to redirect ourselves towards our fitra. And so this is a very famous tradition of the Prophet. It says there's no newborn except they're born on a primordial disposition. And then their parents raise them as either a Jew, a Christian, or a Zoroastrian. This is really interesting, I find. People go, oh, that's so offensive. That's so not PC. But we've got to reflect on what he's saying. Because if you think about it, he says a Jew first. According to the Jewish faith is very much traditionally was about identity. It was about identifying as we are people that belong to something. And we are exclusive to some extent. And so he's saying that's going off course. Because faith is not about belonging to something. It's not like, I'm Muslim, I'm going to paradise, you're going, you dirty Gora, you're going to, you heathen, you Gentile, you're going to hell. That's not, there's no exclusivity for the individual for paradise. It's about you've got to do something, you've got to believe in something, you've got to have conviction in it. It's not just about I affiliate to something. So identity politics is not really in favour in its traditional Islam. It's about what you really, trying to find yourself. And so that's where the Jews went away. They believed in one God, but they had this exclusivity about them. Then Christians, from a Christian understanding, I'm going to be really cautious of time here, is the idea that God came into his creation, obviously as a son of God. And so broadening this is that God is, and I know Christians they don't believe this, but it suggests it, is that God is part of his creation, if that makes sense. And that's another way of going astray, which is, and I know there's different beliefs even in Hinduism about this topic, but in many Eastern religions, this idea that God is part of his creation, isn't it? We are part of God. And Islam's got a very interesting answer. I've contemplated over this a number of, for a very long time. I sit on trains and I've got, trains are late, and so I sit there and just think about weird things. So one of them I said, how is Islam different then from the Eastern traditions from this perspective? We believe as Muslims that the creation is the act of God. I think most faiths would accept that. That it's like, هَذَا خَلْقُ اللَّهِ, we say in the Quran. This is the creation of God. Now, it's a very interesting word, the word khalq, because it's a verbal noun. I don't know if people know their grammar, but a verbal noun is an action that is a noun. So, for example, if I say running is good for your health. Now, running is not something, you can't see running, can you? I can see someone running, carrying out the act, but running is a noun. And so I'm talking about running. And so an act, you can't conceptualize an action. You only can conceptualize an action through someone carrying out the action. Does that make sense? So if I'm moving my arm, if I disappear, is there any movement happening? So the verb is dependent on a subject. The idea is that all this creation is, and we all believe, this is energy, a matter, isn't it? It's energy. And it's constantly coming in and out. It's a flow of energy. And we see this in, if you look at I'm watching a movie and I'm believing that it's moving fluidly. But the reality is what is it? It's, if you were to just take the film, they're all separate, aren't they? So the idea of every moment is new. As Allah says, كُلُّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ in Surah Rahman. Every moment, now scholars say this means, even though it usually means day yom, that every moment He's in a different affair, God. And so the idea is that every moment is new. And this is energy that God is creating. He's creating constantly in the creation. Now, so and so that translation could be, this is the creation of Allah. It could refer to the product. Or it could refer to, this is the creating of God. Does that make sense? When God says this is the creation of God, what we see before us, but it's the creating of God, the actual act taking place. Now, if all this universe is basically God creating constantly, if God disappeared, what would happen? You wouldn't have an act. So God is not part of. Do you see the point I'm coming to now? Sorry, I'll get a bit philosophical. But the creation is the act of God. It's necessary to have a subject. And if God disappeared, this would not remain at any moment. And so the idea is God is not His creation, coming back to the whole point, but the creation's completely dependent on Him. And we could look at the God is creation in terms of, if I say, I'm moving my arm. So this movement is affiliated to me, but it's not me. It's something I'm carrying out, but it's associated to me. And so that's a very fine distinction between Eastern traditions and the Islamic faith. Islam seems to get, I think, a very beautiful middle path in that God is not part of the creation, but He's necessary for the creation, and He's acting within His creation every moment, every time. And then the next interesting is Zoroastrianism. Freddie Mercury was a Zoroastrian. He's the most famous Zoroastrian. And so what did Zoroastrians believe? They believed there was a dichotomy in the world between a constant battle between good and evil, and that they were opposed forces. And this again is, from an Islamic point of view, is going astray, because God is in control. It's not like this evil force clashing against this good force, and there's these two forces in the world, because God is powerful over all things and He is in control. And so I believe that the reason that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing on him, he highlighted this was, these are ways that you can diverge from the truth. And the ultimate truth is God is absolute, and God is unlike His creation, and God is in control. And then he says, it's like an animal. You see an animal born and it's wholesome, and then what happens? We cut the bone, we cut its horns, and we deform it. The Arabs used to do this to animals. They used to, they cut the tail or cut an ear or something like that. It says it's born whole. This is like the human being, it's born whole. So this is this concept of fitra that we have in Islam. And then a Quranic verse highlighting this. This is the sibghat Allah. This is the colouring of Allah. Allah's coloured us in a way, and He wishes us to try to tune into that colouring. And then He says in another famous verse in Surah a chapter of the fig, we have without a doubt created the human in the best of statures. The way the human's been created, he's unique in the creation. And another really beautiful tradition to highlight this is that you'll find people like mineral sources, mines. The best of them before Islam, before accepting Islam, are the best of them in Islam if they're steeped in understanding. So the idea of Islam is, it doesn't make you reject your identity that you had before you. Rather, it's like it gives you clarity in how to actually go on in your life and actually refine yourself as a human being. And so it's not that suddenly I become Muslim and I've got to wear shawar kameez. I could never do shawar kameez. Do you know why? Because the trousers, I never could get them to line up. There's this line you've got to have with the shalwar. And like every time, and then there's that toggle thing, isn't it? Like, oh my God. And then I'll be walking down the street and the lines are right here. So I gave up, after the wedding day, I put the shalwar and the kameez away. And so the idea is that Islam is giving you an identity, a way of looking at the world. It's not that it wants you to give up on your identity and what you've been born with and so forth. And this really beautiful analogy about that we're minds, i.e. we all have jewels within us, but all those minds are all different. We're all born differently, and we have to dig down to achieve, have to graft in order to extract jewels that are within us. It's a very, very beautiful tradition. And there's this idea in Islam is of the heart. The heart is the centre of the human being. And we're not necessarily talking about the physical heart, talking about the spiritual heart, but we believe in Islam there's a connection between the two. And there's a very famous tradition that truly, so we have this fitrah, this primordial nature, and then the servant commits a sin, he does wrong, he goes off course, and a black dot appears on his heart. And the idea in Islam is that the heart is what clarifies what truth is. It gives, our heart's pure, we can see things with clarity. We can see truth. But then when we steer off, a black dot appears. And then if we do a good act after that, or we turn to God, it's like you polish that. It's like a mirror. And the mirror reflects reality. And the more sin we do, it's like rust that builds on there, and we're not able to see things as they truly are. And so there's this idea in Islam is that the human being is constantly trying to refine his clarity of looking at things as they are, as they should be. However, if he persists, it will increase until it overwhelms the heart. Well, you can't see good for good, and you see evil. You may see evil for good, and you may say good for evil. He says, this is the rust that God referred to in the verse, which is a verse of the Quran. Nay, rust has overcome the hurts due to what they've acquired. So there's this concept. And then this is the sort of model, the psychological model of the human being according to the Islamic tradition. So the idea is that we have the heart as our centre, that we're trying to refine. And the heart knows what's right and what's wrong. And we have the intellect. Now, when we say intellect here, we're not talking about IQ. In Arabic, aql means to restrain something. So we have these two, we have the heart, which is our centre, and then we have the spirit, the ruh in Arabic, that wants us to attach to God, something larger than ourselves, and wants to excel. And then we have the soul, the nafs, which is not necessarily negative. It's the animal side to us, which is not negative, because these are natural urges, like wanting to eat, wanting to sleep, wanting to have sex, and so forth. These urges within us, but we have to try to contain those desires in a healthy way. So there's this constant battle. And the way that, so I see something and say, that's good. And then my animal side might say, oh, I want to do that. And then the aql is the thing that restrains it. It says, no, don't do that. It's that capacity, that strength and resilience to say, no, that's not a good thing, and draw yourself back. And so that is the vehicle and the tool by which the heart is able to do the right thing. And the more good we do, the more we listen, we train our soul, by the animal side of us, in a healthy way. Like a child, we channel it towards its good and try to give it the ability to have self-restraint and try to integrate our natural side of us, i.e. the earthly side to us, to the angelic, to the spiritual side of us. We integrate these two. We become a full human being, a whole human being. We live Islam. But there's this problem with the devil, the shaitan, and really interesting from the Islamic perspective. Shaitan, there's difference of opinion about this, but one of the opinions is that, that's my plug at the end, is that the shaitan is something that goes astray. So the idea, people always ask me this, they ask me, how do I know if it's my nafs, i.e. my soul, that's calling to me to evil, or how do I know it's the devil? So I say, the devil is what's trying to take you away. It speaks to the animal side of you and wants you to go off to an extreme that takes you away from something that's healthy. So that we see that symbolically as, and from an Islamic perspective, and literally as well, but that which takes you away from your nature is satanic. And then what we do is, we discipline the soul, and we try to avoid acts that bring our eventual destruction, and we try to refine our soul from doing acts of salvation, and by doing that we connect to God. So this is like the Islamic paradigm of understanding the human being. And inshallah I'll finish with that. I was going to go through the Fatiha if I had time, but we don't have time today. So this is just a short summary of my understanding as a Muslim for studying it for the last 22 years of what Islam is and how it's helped me in my life. Thank you very much.